Welcome to the Operation Move podcast. My name is Zoe and we are, it's got to be like the 10,000th day of May, maybe. Anyway, Twilight Zone jokes aside, I've finally, the kids have gone back to school one day each, one yesterday and Piper today, which initially I was a little bit bummed about the fact that they were separated and so that I wouldn't have like one condensed kid-free day, but actually I think I was too hasty to judge it because Riley was at school yesterday and turns out 50% less children is a lot. And I actually think I'll probably get more benefit by having 2 days with one of them as opposed to 1 day without any of them for the day. So I think it's actually going to work out okay. But Piper is the one who commandeers my office. So now that she is at school on a Tuesday, I can go back to recording the podcast again, which is a good thing. Anyway, I think it's been an interesting time for running because you've got sort of all of these races scrapped, and it kind of puts you in a position of really taking a bit of a deep dive into why you do it in the first place. And this morning I had a fartlek run to do, which I'm actually really enjoying, particularly given that all of my runs are your runs with staying local. Having a lot of my sessions be more fartlek based and more effort based just makes it a lot easier to just go out and run how I feel on the day. So that was today, and it was a bit of a ladder. So it was sort of a couple of 3-minute efforts, couple of 2-minute efforts, 3 1-minute efforts, and 4 30-second efforts, and all with equal recoveries. And felt pretty good, don't look at the sort of the pacing too much because you're going up and downhill. So who knows what's going on there. And but for the first time in ages, I haven't been putting my chest strap on just because up until recently it's been so humid and just gets chafing, and I was just who cares? I know the wrist is not accurate, but I don't really need it if I'm doing easy runs or long runs. It doesn't really matter, I'm not needing feedback from it. So this is probably the first one in a while that I've had it on, and because it's sort of probably more of an intense run than I have been doing, my watch has a thing where if you hit sort of a threshold pace, threshold heart rate for long enough, it will come up with this new threshold detected, where it will say what your threshold is, and mine is always about 174 beats per minute. And it will say what your average pace is for that. Now, invariably, it never picks this up when I'm doing, a tempo run that's steady. So, for example, the other week I did 5 kilometers, and I think it was sort of maybe 4:58 pace or something like that, not detected. Even though I did have the chest strap on for that. But today, where I'm going up and down because you're running an interval and then you're doing a recovery, so it detects my threshold, but it says your threshold pace is 5:06, which is well down from what it was, and it's got this big down arrow, and it's accept or decline. And I posted it on Twitter. So it's well, do I really want to, here is a reduction in fitness. Do I really want to accept it? I guess I don't have a choice. So it's sort of funny to have that going on at the moment because I have a decent amount of not being super attached to the numbers, because like I'm like, oh well, like I really enjoyed the run. It was good. And let the technology say what it likes. I call my judgy watch Janet. So anytime she says something that I don't like, that's what I call her. But it has been really good in terms of really kind of like focusing in on purpose, rather than sort of like getting into more of a cycle of like, oh well, I've got to do this because I've got this race on this day, and so therefore all of these things have to happen, instead of going, okay, well, I've got no races, I've got no real like pressure to sort of like, like no sort of deadline to meet. Realistically, I know that there are things that are still planned for the end of the year, but I just have a hard time seeing it happening. So like realistically, I don't really see anything happening until next year. But I think it's also kind of cool because it's like, well, I wouldn't, it's also not the kind of thing where I'm like, oh, well, there's no point in doing anything. Like I'm not demotivated by it at all, because, having been running for a long time, I know that a lot of fitness is just like year layered on year layered on year. Like it's not sort of like these little sort of like mini blocks or anything. So it's not like I feel like this year doesn't matter. It's just a very different year. And in some ways too, it's sort of also been about like, on the one hand, you got like all the time in the world to like go out and get running. Like I'm more busy, significantly more busy than I was before, but I've always had time for it before, and I have time for it now. But I think it's also really easy to kind of like get into the trap of like, well, this is my schedule and this has always been my schedule, and like why should I be struggling with it now? Like structurally nothing has really changed for me, but you're completely taking yourself out of that environment, which is stressful. Everything is stressful. Like for me, not having alone time is super stressful. So obviously I get that when I'm running, which is great, but it's also nice to have it when you're not doing stuff too. So yeah, like you can't take yourself out of that environment, or the environment where you're dealing with dealing with things that are stressing out the kids. Like them adjusting to a whole new system of learning through online is stressful. And I haven't really been regimented in what I'm asking them to do. Like if I like them to do bits here and there, if they need help with stuff, I'm happy to help them. But also if they say, I don't want to do this today, fine, don't do it. And that's just the approach I've taken, in part because I'm working, but also in part because I don't really think it matters if they didn't do any schoolwork for 3 months. I think they'd be fine. And like, obviously everyone's doing the best they can in that, and like for some kids they probably do much better with like having the structure, and maybe I would do more of that if I wasn't working, but that sort of like seems to have worked best for us. But that's, they're going through a stressful period of time as well, and so like you can't not be affected by that. And like not having like all of the normal sort of activities that you would do, or seeing the people you would see, like it all has an impact. So even though I've been wanting to like keep up with what my normal training would be, also some of it is going, okay, like you are demonstrating a high level of mental and physical fatigue now, so we're just going to take the foot off the gas here and just like have some chocolate, have a glass of wine, have an early night, and we'll come at this again tomorrow. And I think what it often comes down to is just get back into that thing of actually why are you running in in the first place, you know, like, and I think that it has actually been really good for me in that way to, you know, to strip back all of the external stuff, which is fun. And I'm not sort of downplaying how important running events are for seeing people, for celebrating running, for being part of a community. That's all very important, and I think that it's really natural during this time to be, you know, grieving that, because it's like, it's, chances are it's looking like a full year, and a lot of us do live regionally, so it's kind of like often those are the few times we get to see certain people, and particularly at the moment where there's not a whole lot of like even travel locally happening for obvious reasons. But it has been a great opportunity to sort of take away all of that stuff, which is ultimately just a bonus, not the reason. And particularly as I appear to be getting slower and slower as the weeks progress, it's kind of taking that away too, which is ultimately going to happen in the long term anyway. You know, like, as there's a level where, like, when you come into running late, as I did, that you haven't hit your full potential yet, because your training age is so young. So even though, so like if I had been a talented kid and done track at school and that kind of cross country at school, chances are I would be slowing down by now, because I would have hit my full potential at a much younger age. And then as you age, things just slow down, as they do. But because a lot of us have come into it at an older age, you haven't hit that potential yet. And so there is going to become a point where I will hit that potential, or maybe I already have, hard to say. And things are going to start slowing down. So it can't, that sort of sense of improvement isn't like a long-term sustainable goal, because ultimately at a certain point I am going to start getting slower, and I'm going to need something else to focus on, and I'm going to need something else as a driver. And I don't think that necessarily means like not being competitive with myself, because like I see, I'm always so inspired by all of the achievements of masters within their age category. So I think it's probably just a bit more of a shift than anything else. But having that as not something like that, improvement does not appear to be happening at the moment. It's actually good, because it sort of like takes that element away, and you get down to sort of like the absolute core of what is getting you out of bed in the morning, or why have you been working on this pursuit for as long as you have, and all of that sort of stuff, where, you know, you can be it's easy to get out of bed when every run was better than the last one. But also I think that it has really been good too, in terms of like seeing things not always in terms of, you know, like pacing and time. Like I say, I'm joking about getting worse, but I do think there are a lot of elements of improvement with having done all of the running on hills that I've been doing. Like that definitely feels like it's improved vastly, and that it was like a really underdeveloped area. But just in terms of like all of my sort of like more like tempo, or I did a 10k benchmark slower. So with all of that going on, it sort of just allows you to get down to the core of it, which is what you need for long-term sustainable habits. Is there are always going to be those external things that are going to go away, events that are going to go away, things that you can't do because you're unwell, or you have an injury of some kind, or, you know, ultimately, things that are going to have to change as you get older, and hopefully adapt with that, and just all of those sorts of things that are going to impact on it in the long term. And for me, definitely, like, the most inspiring people are the people that you see that are still in their 90s and still doing it, which is what I loved about going to the Masters. So for me, it's sort of gotten down to, I love being awake at that time of morning, where I just get to see what the sky looks like that day. And yes, I could do that without running 15 kilometers, but I wouldn't. And I love finding the rhythm of my feet on the ground, and just even now, I haven't actually written this Instagram post yet because that's how distracted today has been. I've been meaning to write it. But I remember after my first half marathon, I was not back to running yet because it was like an all-out effort, and it took a lot of recovery. And I remember going for a walk along the path where I'd done like most of my training runs, and I was wearing thongs, I think, because my feet had not substantially recovered enough for shoes. And I remember just being so impressed that my legs had been able to do that, because it was so far out of like my concept of like what my capabilities were. And it was still kind of like shocking to me that it happened. And every now and then I look down at my legs after a run and I'm like, wow, you just did that. And sometimes it is incredibly boring, especially when you're running in the same suburb and on the same route and all of that sort of stuff. But you just never know when you're going to go out and the clouds are going to look a certain way, or the sun is going to hit the mist in a certain way, and it's going to totally change your day. And I think that is probably still the main, like, when you take away all of that sort of stuff, I just think that if you go outside, something amazing it's bound to happen. And I think also for me too, there's just no loneliness in running. Like, I have company when I'm sad, I have company when I'm happy. It's, in a lot of ways, I think I started thinking about running as like another person ages ago, as a way to get myself out there. Like if I didn't go, I would be, like standing someone up, that kind of thing. And it probably just started because I always ran on my own, so I was never meeting anyone, but I always just sort of started thinking about running as a relationship and almost like a second character or a second person. And so everything feels whole when I run. And I think that that's another thing that I've gotten in touch with. When you have taken everything else is sort of missing, then you can kind of like get down to that core of what that is. And I think that it is really challenging at the moment to maintain things as they were, because everything is different. And so I think that you've got to be a little bit generous with yourself, and like, there have been, like, I probably haven't really struggled too much in terms of getting my running happening. Maybe like in terms of timing, like it's really easy to sleep in and do it later and then sort of like struggle to get everything else done through the day. But it's such an ingrained thing that it's just something that happens. But I know like I've really sort of struggled to hit some like consistency with like nutrition stuff as well. And so a lot of that is just going, okay, like some of this I need to pay attention to because eating crappy food actually makes me feel not great, and I feel better when I'm eating good food. But some of it is also just like, you want the cookie, have the freaking cookie, you know? And, you know, understanding that there are going to be a whole range of coping mechanisms that are happening at the moment. And for me, like some of them might be, quote, more healthy than others. But in some way they're all necessary. So, you know, and just being okay with that. And that is fine. Like I was listening to a conversation on a podcast, and they were relaying a chat that they'd had with Arnold Schwarzenegger, and he's sort of like known for being super, super disciplined, and he was pouring somebody a drink and he's like, you need a little bit of dysfunction. So, you know, like I think that just knowing what feels good for you, and that sometimes that's going to look like something that is, you know, sort of like, I guess, like something that's sort of like you would be more traditionally associate with well-being. So for me, that would be like, I've been pretty good about doing about 5 yoga sessions a week just on the app, and like about 5 of my mobility sessions. So and that for me is probably like a lot harder than going for a run, but it's something that I've really tried to prioritize, because I'm like, okay, like I know this is something I want to work on with my mobility and flexibility, because I think it is a limiter, and I'm fine once I get going. And yes, like sure, I do look at the clock like about 10 million times while the app is running, because it's not really what I want to be doing, but I can still do it. But then it also looks like, you know, just not beating myself up about other things that maybe would be outside of what I would normally consider to be ideal, and just going with the flow a bit on that, and just knowing that the hard part with all of this is like there not being an end point. I think once there's an end point, it's really easy to kind of go, okay, like I can get there. But it's like, you know, you're running a marathon, but like it could be 42 kilometers, but it could be 240 and you don't know. So you got to pace yourself accordingly and ideally pace yourself for the longer distance rather than the shorter one, which is definitely the feeling that I had last week when we're just at the stage of like getting there. Like the kids were starting their 1 day a week of school this week, and I guess they'd been home for like probably about a similar amount of time of the summer school holidays. It felt like so much longer, and ordinarily that's about the time where I'm starting to lose the plot a little bit. And you know, like you're sort of at the end of those summer holidays, you're sort of like dragging yourself to the finish line. And then I was doing that, but I'm like, we're not even halfway there yet, which is probably why I was feeling so exhausted. So I think that knowing all of that, it is just worthwhile to give yourself plenty of space to cope with things however you need to cope with it, whatever that looks like for you. And I think the main thing to keep in mind with running is that chances are the amount of time that you've put in is much more about creating a habit than it is about creating an outcome. So you can just completely relax about, like what your pace is like, what the workouts are like. Take your foot off the gas in the workouts, like just do it at 80%. Don't bury yourself, and just keep that habit going, because when we do eventually get to the end of this ultra marathon, you will have wanted to keep touch with all of those habits that you spent so long building, because they take such a long time to build and they're really easy to erode. So yeah, that is just something to keep in mind, that like modify the thing but don't change the habit. So like maybe right now you're not up for running however many kilometers a week, but you normally run 3 or 4 days a week, and so you just go, okay, well, 3 or 4 days a week, that is now going to be a 20-minute run for me, and I'm just going to maintain this habit until I feel like I have the capacity for more. And that way you will come out of this with the most important thing, which is the habit that you have created, and maintaining a connection with your running and what you enjoy about it, and all of the positives, rather than it turning into this other thing, which is just like another weight on your endless to-do list that that you just feel like you're failing at. So that turned out a little bit longer than what I was going for. I can kind of hear my voice going a little bit, because I'm so deconditioned to talking to people at older than 12. But that is it for this week. Now I do have my office back once a week, so podcasts can go back to being recorded. And yes, I'm aware that I could chuck the 9-year-old out of the office at any time to record the podcast, but you've got to, like, I saw a thing the other week, it's like pick your battles, and they're like, no, that's too many, put some down. And I was like, oh yeah, I feel that in my bones. And that was one of those hills that I decided not to die on over the last few weeks. So I will be back doing them. Any questions that you would like answered, that would be great. You can just send them through to me. Only questions that I got this week was, what shoes should I wear while running in a weighted vest? And the answer is, don't run in a weighted vest. Like maybe once in a while for a CrossFit workout, but other than that, do not. That's going to just like bugger up all of your biomechanics. Don't do that. And what other one did I see? Like, not specifically at me. It was just like a running question that I saw. Oh yeah, like how aggressive a fat loss cut can I do while training for a marathon? Also, don't do that. It's a bad idea. Just eat as much as you burn is all you need to do for that. So I will be back next week. We are currently in week 2 of Learn to Run, which is going fantastic. It's so great to see everyone out there. And as always, at any time, you can join Run Club. Has training programs, support group, lots of cool people. And one-on-one coaching is always open too. So even if at any time you want to do a Learn to Run style program, but you just want to do it one-on-one with me, you can just sign up for one-on-one coaching, and that is all good. So I will pop links for everything in the description, and I will be back to chat to you next week.